Hey guys, and welcome back. My name is Miss Danielson, and today we're looking at horizontal, vertical, and sloping or diagonal lines. Let's get started with coordinates to make sure that you haven't got those confused. XY coordinates define the position of any point on a graph. We call them XY coordinates with reference to the X and Y axis. The X axis lies horizontally across a graph, while the y-axis lies vertically up or down the graph. You may want to draw horizontal or vertical arrows along with your note to make sure you don't get the terminology confused. Both axes should be labeled with equally spaced markings, which are numbered on the lines, not the squares. Now I know this graph here might be a bit confusing because you may think that that one is labeling this square. It's not. It's labeling this line that is one square away from the crossing points of the x and y axis. So I'll show that I'm labeling the lines by putting little markings on the lines after each square. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. The x-axis and y-axis intersect, that means they cross each other, at the point of origin, which is the point 0, 0, right here. So we can often label our axes with a single 0 at that crossing point. This is a 0 on the x-axis as well as a 0 on the y-axis. Coordinates rely on the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate in order to pinpoint an exact position. And we need to write these variables alphabetically, so x before y. To remember this, you should remember we walk before we fly. For example, if I want to figure out what point this is, first I would start at the origin, that's the point 0, 0 here. I'm going to start by first walking across the x-axis till I get to the right house, and then I'll take the elevator up to the correct floor. So I can clearly see, going in that correct order, this is the point 2, 4, because I walked across to house number 2, and then I took the elevator up to floor number 4. This is not the point 4, 2. If you first took the elevator up and then tried to do some crazy parkour and jump across to house number 2, boom. Please don't do that. I don't want anyone getting hurt in my lesson. So, walk before we fly. So long as we understand how coordinates work, we can now explore the coordinates on a line. Coordinates on a straight line will always follow some set rule. So for this line, for example, we can set out a table of values to find the pattern that the coordinates follow, and from there we can work out what the rule is for that line. So looking at the coordinates on this line, I'll choose a few coordinates that are nice and easy. That's where x is 0, and what's the y value here? I have to take the elevator up to floor number 3. So that's the point 0, 3. This next point here is where x is equal to 1. I've walked across 1 from my origin, and I take the elevator up 3 floors. So that's the point 1, 3. For this next point here, I've walked across to house number 2, and I take the elevator up to floor number 3. That's the point 2, 3. You may already notice a pattern with the first 3 coordinates here, and you need at least 3 points to make a straight line. Imagine if this point was in the wrong position, for example. That would not be a straight line. But more coordinates might be helpful just to prove your point. So this next coordinate here, I've walked across 3. This is house number 3, and I'm taking the elevator up 3 floors. That's the point 3, 3. And this next point here, I walk across to house number 4 and take the elevator up 3 floors. That's the point 4, 3. Do you notice the pattern here? I hope so. It should be pretty obvious. For horizontal lines, the points will always have the same y-coordinate. Notice how all of these points are lined up with the same value on the y-axis. So our rule will always have the form y equals some number. And by setting out a table of values or looking at the pattern in the coordinates, you should be able to clearly figure out what that number is. So in this case, the equation of our line is y equals 3. To label our line clearly, I'm going to put an arrow from the equation of the line to where the line is. But I make sure that that arrow is a zigzag or lightning bolt arrow, so I don't confuse that arrow with another line that I've graphed. Let's try another line. Again, this is a horizontal line, so we know that the points along this line always have the same y-coordinate. What's the y-coordinate for all the coordinates on this green line? Well, this is the point 0, -2. This here is the point 1, -2. This here is the point 2, -2. No matter how far I run across the x-axis, I have to always take the elevator down to floor number -2. The y-coordinate is always -2. So I can just go ahead and label this line with its equation, lightning bolt arrow again, and say that the equation of this line, or the rule for all of the points along this line, is that y is equal to -2. Before we move on, you're going to want to copy down that note and those examples. Now let's have a look at a vertical line. This green line here goes perfectly vertically up and down the graph. You can see that it does not go across to the left or right at all. So we should be able to figure out what the rule for all of the coordinates on this line is. In fact, some of you may already know what it is. Go ahead and copy that diagram and label that line with its equation if you already know it. Otherwise, let's set up a table of values again, but this time, as we said, the x values are not changing. This line does not go from left to right at all. So here I've put different y values. When the y value is equal to 0, so here, what's the x value? I have to run across to 3 and then take the elevator to 0. So that's the point 3, 0. What about this next point here? When y is equal to 1, what's the x coordinate? I have to run across to house number 3 and then take the elevator up 1. So that's the point 3, 1. This next point, again, I'm running over to house number 3 and taking the elevator up to floor number 2. That's the point 3, 2. Notice the pattern? It should only take 3 points to be able to find the pattern, but let's keep going to make sure that that pattern continues. When y is equal to 3, so the point on the line when y is equal to 3, I have to run across to house number 3 and take the elevator up 3 floors. That's the point 3, 3. And one more point, when the y-coordinate is 4, I run across along the x-axis to house number 3 and take the elevator up to floor number 4. That's the point 3, 4. So did you notice the pattern? I hope so. It should be pretty clear and obvious. For vertical lines, the points will always have the same x-coordinate. So the equation or rule for all of their coordinates have the form x equals some constant number. And in this case, what's our rule? X is always equal to 3. So I've labeled my line with my lightning bolt arrow, x equals 3. Shall we try another example? What about this yellow vertical line? That's a tough one. That's the y-axis. But what's the rule for all of the points along that y-axis? I'll give you a hint. It's a vertical line. The equation must be x equals some number. What's the x-coordinate for every point along this line? This is the point 0, 0. This is the point 0, 1. This is the point 0, 2. Do you see the pattern yet? 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5. The x-coordinate is always 0. See how my lightning bolt arrow comes in handy here? I've labeled the line with its equation, and I don't want you to get confused and think that I'm labeling the green line with this equation. For the yellow line, x is equal to 0. You may want to write that note down before we move on. You definitely will want to write down that rule about the y-axis, The equation for the y-axis is x equals 0. You may have already figured this out as well. What's the equation for the x-axis? All points along the x-axis will follow the rule y equals 0. So the equation for the x-axis is y equals 0. Let's go on to some practice now. First, have a look at these lines that I've graphed and label each one with its equation. That means you're going to hit pause, copy the diagram, be very careful when setting out your axes to make sure that they're evenly spaced and you've numbered the lines, not the squares. Also remember to label your x and y axes with the letters x and y. For question 2, I just want you to look at these equations and tell me which of these lines will be horizontal and which will be vertical. That should be fairly straightforward given what we've just been through in our note about the rules for horizontal and vertical lines. For question 3, I want you to set out your own set of axes and pay attention to how big your axes need to be. Here I drew my x-axis from -4 up to +7 and my y-axis from -4 up to +5. Look at the lines we need to graph. How big should you make your axes? So set out your axes and graph those lines and label them with their equations. Go ahead and hit pause now and take your time to do that carefully and neatly in pencil and hit play when you're ready to take it up. I hope you had a chance to hit pause because here come your answers. For question 1, let's label these lines. I'm going to go in rainbow order. So starting with the red line, that's a horizontal line. That's the line y equals -2. Next, the yellow line, that's a vertical line. That's the line x equals 4. Next, the green line is a horizontal line and it crosses the y-axis at 4. That's the line y equals 4. Next, this purple line might have confused you a bit because I drew it quite short. But notice I always draw these arrows on either ends of my lines. That's because those lines go on forever. So if I continue that line down, you should see it crosses the x-axis at -1, and it's a vertical line. That's the line x equals -1. On to question 2. You should be able to tell just by looking if these are horizontal or vertical lines. X equals a number. X equals a number will be a vertical line. Y equals a number will be a horizontal line. Even if x equals a negative number or a decimal number, it's still a vertical line. And y equals a number, that's a horizontal line. Let's have a look at what these look like graphed now. First, look at how I set up my axes. I noticed that my axes didn't need to be very big. The highest y coordinate I need was 2, and the highest x value I needed was also 2. The lowest y value I needed was 0. I didn't even need to go into the negatives. But the lowest x value I needed was -0.5, or -0.5. And that's what helped me to decide how to space out my axes. How am I going to graph a half on an axis? Well, if I take 2 squares to make one whole, 1 square will be a half. So -0.5 will be here between 0 and -1. If you didn't set out your axes that way, maybe you want to hit pause now and try it again, and hit play when you're ready to take it up. Let's go ahead and take this up. So question A, x equals 2. Well, here's the 2 on the x-axis. This is a vertical line where all of the points along this line are equal to 2. For question B, y equals 0. We just went over what y equals 0 will look like. That's 0 on the y-axis. It's a horizontal line. Y equals 0 is the x-axis. Question C, x equals -0.5. I've shown you how I set up my axes just to accommodate for that. X equals -0.5 is here. This is a vertical line. All the points along the line have an x coordinate of -0.5. And finally D, y equals 2. That's a horizontal line that crosses the y-axis at 2. And all points along this line will have a y-coordinate of 2. Now, how did you do? Hopefully that was fairly straightforward. I know some of you might be looking at the title and thinking, we did vertical lines and horizontal lines, but where are our sloping lines? Well, here you go. A little bit of an extra note for you, so go ahead and copy this down. Sloping lines will be a little bit more difficult because it won't just be x equals a number or y equals a number. The y-coordinate value will depend on the x-coordinate value. So the equation of a sloping line will look a bit more like this. Now it may look a bit confusing, and it is definitely more challenging than what we've already done, but you're going to need to work out what the m number is and what the c number is by figuring out the pattern of the coordinates in the line. We're going to get into that in our next lesson, so do watch out for that. But here's an example for you to try if you think you can manage it. So there's a line. Go ahead and work out the coordinates of different points along that line. Fill in this table of values, at least 3 points, and see if you can work out what the rule is. Please let me know down in the comments section if any of you think you figured it out. Otherwise, make sure you tune in for our next lesson where we'll be following the equations of both horizontal, vertical, and sloping lines. Hope to see you there.